became known as the Night of the Long Knives. These two guys had about 200 top members of the SA murdered, including Rom. And from that point, the SA was demoted, the SS promoted under Heinrich Himmler. That was where, at the point in which he gave his SS men the complete black uniforms to wear with the skull and crossbones on the cap. So these were the men who ran the concentration camps, later the death camps. They had fighting units, the Waffen SS, within which were special commando units that actually followed the German army into Poland and Russia in particular, seeking out communist leaders and Jews and murdering them. It was the beginnings of the Holocaust.
So the SS was an abbreviation of?
Stutzstaffel.
Okay.
Yeah, a special one.
So the Gestapo down the street, those are the creepy guys that we see in old movies in the long leather trench coats. They were taking care of the civilian population. So that was a civilian secret service, and I'll talk more about them when we get down to that end of the block. I want to talk a little bit about the personalities now. Heinrich Himmler was a very peculiar man. They claimed he was a man with no personality, a very bland bureaucrat who saw himself as Hitler's order taker, either explicit or implied. In fact, he was a rabid anti-Semite and a cold-blooded killer, and also a man who lived under a lot of bizarre delusions. Himmler actually believed, toward the end of the war, that after the war, he would be allowed to make a separate peace with the Allies, and that they would allow him to run a small fascist state in the northwest corner of Germany. He had no idea that next to Hitler himself, he was the most wanted war criminal. Strange man.
Yeah.
His number one henchman, Reinhard Heydrich, also an interesting personality. He was a tall, good-looking man. He was a good swordsman. He was on one of Germany's Olympic teams. An accomplished violinist. They said that his violin playing could move people to tears. But I think among all the top Nazis, he was the most scheming and ruthless and cold-blooded of them all. He was the man who convened the Wannsee Conference. Wannsee is a lake here on the edge of town. And in the winter of 1942, he took over a villa along that lake and convened a conference to arrive at the final solution of the Jewish problem. So that's where the Holocaust was mapped out and designed. He was also the only top Nazi who was assassinated during the Second World War. One of his minor jobs was he was the Gauleiter, the political leader of the city of Prague. And he was riding through Prague one day in an open Mercedes. He was attacked by a group of Czech partisans, and he was assassinated. Hitler and the Nazis came to believe that the little town of Lidice, outside of Prague, had supported and encouraged these partisans. And so Hitler had this town leveled to the ground, and all 2,000 of its citizens, including cats and dogs, put in the church, and they burned the church to the ground. So they were all murdered. Yeah. Lidice is today a commemorative site. It's a little sideline. I'll tell you that in the winter, my wife and I do an English conversation course at a high school for kids with learning disabilities here. And last year I noticed that there was a little rose garden behind the school dedicated to the town of Lidice. And the kids take care of that. Some of the kids in the school take care of this rose garden. And any ones who do, in the summertime, they get to go to Lidice, and they have a rose garden there, and they take care of that. And I tell you that to give you some idea as to what Germany is like today. I think the Germans do a pretty good job, or have done a pretty good job, of compensating for what the Nazis did in the best way they can. I don't think you can ever really compensate.
But the Germans, I told Karina earlier today, they seem to be quite open about what happened.
Yes.
I mean, if you take Japan, for instance, they have for many
Never.
years, denied that their role or, diminished their role.
I want to show you first what this building looked like at the end of the war. So here's the museum behind us,
Okay.
right? And here's the Gestapo headquarters, which sat right in here. And as soon as, I forgot to tell you that as soon as Göring took over this building, he had a cell block built onto the back with 52 cells. That was back in there, okay? And here's
So this front here, that would be that
yeah,
street.
right here.
All right.
Right? It's Aberstrasse here. So, at the end of the war, this of course was in West Berlin. These buildings were only minorly damaged. They could have been fixed up and used again, but nobody was going to put any money into them, and with the onus hanging over them, nobody wanted to use them. They stood empty for about 7 years, and then the West Berlin government tore them all down, dumped the rubble in a pile over there, and this also became a no man's land. Not because the West Berlin government was trying to keep people away from here, but most people just had no reason to come to this part of Berlin. And it stayed that way until 1980. Because in '79, the West Berlin government decided to fix up the museum and open it up again. So they spent a couple of years restoring it. By the way, they intentionally left the bullet and shrapnel holes in the outside. Gives you a pretty good idea of the intensity of the battle for Berlin.
Shooting.
Yeah. So now 1980, they're ready to reopen the museum, but they had a big problem with the front door because the wall ran right across it.
Yeah.
So they decided to make the old back door into the front, into the entrance. So imagine now opening night, a black tie affair. All the important people in West Germany and West Berlin were invited. Limousines are pulling up back there, letting people out in ball gowns and tuxedos, and a group of students held up a big sign back in the corner there that said, "Do you realize you're just steps away from the former torture cells of the Gestapo?"
Yeah.
And for the first time since the end of the war, there was suddenly some interest in this site. So a group of students came here, archaeology students, and they started to dig out the basement wall of the Gestapo headquarters. So that's the actual basement wall of the Gestapo headquarters. They immediately...
Is that going to be preserved?
Yeah. They immediately got government interest and government funding, and then the entire basement wall was dug out of the Gestapo headquarters, and also up there, the SS headquarters. It left a trench here, and then they put like a wooden roof over it, and inside it they made this exhibit, The Topography of Terror, which was dedicated to the victims of Nazism and to the German resistance movement. So there was a time back in the 1980s when they were thinking of putting the Holocaust Memorial here, but that plan was scrapped. And then it was decided that all the documentation for the Third Reich is scattered all around Germany. They wanted to bring it together into one place for researchers and scholars. And so this is a research facility that'll be finished probably by next year. Mm-hmm. And then this whole area is being redone. If you look way over there, that's the exhibit, which they just moved over there.
Yeah.
If you have the time and the interest, you can come back here, and in that little box where that guy just walked out, you can get a English audio tape and go through the exhibit. It takes a good hour and a half to do that. So what I'm going to do is just tell you a little bit about the highlights. And for me, one of the highlights is about the German resistance movement. So let's just go down here a little bit and get out of there. I want to talk some about the German resistance movement. And I always need to preface this a little bit because I do not want to imply that most Germans resisted this new regime. Actually, the opposite was true.